Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're not going to talk about king's battles or grand empires, but about a quieter, humbler world hidden beneath the earth. Picture this, a corner of a medieval European village. Smoke curling from a stone cottage chimney, the faint aroma of herbs drifting in the air. Outside, beneath the cold, silent ground, something curious is growing. Not gold, not treasure, but vegetables. Humble roots that the modern world has mostly forgotten. Yet they were once the saviors of winter meals, carrying people through brutal seasons and times of famine. These aren't the glossy supermarket vegetables you're used to. No shiny bell peppers or pristine broccoli here. Just rugged root crops that look like they've survived the end of the world and somehow bring with them a taste of comfort. Honestly, if you were suddenly transported back to the 14th century without these in your stew pot, you probably wouldn't survive your first medieval winter. So before you settle in and get too cozy, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly enjoy what we're building here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, let the soft hum of a fan create a gentle breeze in the background, and let's step into tonight's journey together. You lean back. The lights dim. The fan hums softly like a whisper in the dark. On the screen, a gentle glow begins to unfold a story, the story of a vegetable that if you lived in 14th century Europe, you might have eaten 3 times a week until one day it simply vanished as if it had never existed at all. Skirret, or as the old nuns in ancient monasteries like to call it, Sium Cicerum. But don't let the Latin name keep you up at night. We're just talking about a small, white, sweet root about the length of a pencil, with curves so odd you'd think nature had glitched. But Noit's a treasure, a sweet gift from the soil. Skirret doesn't grow solo like carrots. It prefers the company of friends' clusters of tangled roots, like a dreamy artist's bundle of paintbrushes. Pull one stalk, and you get a bouquet. It sounds like a trick from Mother Nature, but really it's just her way of rewarding patience. You could boil it, roast it, mash it into a creamy blend that smells of damp earth with a hint of chestnut. If you were a Benedictine monk in the Middle Ages, you might have seasoned it with garlic and thyme and called it supper for the soul. It sounds meditative, though truth be told, it was mostly because salt was scarce. Fun fact: Skirret once grew in the royal gardens of Emperor Charlemagne. He's the man many historians call the father of modern Europe. This humble root sat alongside roses and sacred grapes. But then came the 16th century, and with it, potatoes. Bigger, fatter, lazier. And just like that, skirret was kicked off the noble table, relegated to the farmer's market, then forgotten altogether. Strangely enough, skirret could survive harsh winters, without shelter, without care. Some believe that's why it was abandoned, like a friend who always shows up on time but never brings snacks. Is that the reason botanists still debate? Some say it's because skirret is annoying to peel. Others claim its sweet, mild flavor just didn't suit modern tastes. And a few blame the Industrial Revolution, after all, who had time to chew on small roots while inventing the steam engine. But here's the thing. If you planted a patch of skirret today, you'd have food year-round and a great conversation starter at any hipster dinner party. Oh, you eat organic carrots. I eat skirret, the vegetable of Charlemagne. Sip your tea dramatically. But don't fall asleep just yet. Our journey tonight doesn't end here. We're heading from the royal gardens to the thatched cottages of rural Wales, to a wild green with a curious name, Good King Henry. Not a real king, though he did have a beard. Good King Henry grows on the edge of hedgerows where no one bothers to dig. And that's its superpower. No tending, no watering. It just thrives. People once called it the poor man's asparagus, a name both affectionate and slightly insulting. Picture this March. The snow has just melted. The earth is still wet and gray. But from the foot of a stone wall, green shoots rise. A farmer in a worn wool coat, hands trembling from the cold, bends to pick the tender tops. The taste is a little bitter, but it's the bitterness of hope. Someone once said, eating good King Henry is like chewing on a memory, the scent of soil wood smoke and spring after starvation. Villagers cooked it like spinach or tossed it into lentil soup. On sunny days, they'd sod it with goose fatif. The neighbor's goose wandered too close. A historical gem. A 13th century monastery record from Yorkshire noted monks used it as a gentle laxative. Not the most glamorous legacy, but hey, that was before dietary fiber supplements. A bit of controversy. Some linguists say the name Good King Henry has no royal roots. It might come from the old German Guter Heinrich meaning kind, protector mixed with local imagination. Others believe there was once a folk healer by that name, known for curing with weeds. Who's right, no one knows for sure. You can plant it today, and you should if you've got a forgotten corner in your garden. It will grow every year. No coaxing, no podcasts. But you're not sleepy yet, are you? Because up next, a root that tastes like oysters. Yes, you heard that right. Not because someone dropped seafood in the garden, just because nature has a sense of humor. Get comfortable. Take a deep breath. We're about to tell the tale of salsify, the strangest plant of the night. In the 13th century, medlar was an essential dessert at noble feasts across England and France. It appeared in over 40 historical recipes, ranging from tarts and jams to spiced wine infusions. Records even show that Eleanor of Provence, Queen of England, once placed a formal order for a basket of medlars to be delivered to Glastonbury Abbey. It made perfect sense. In an age when sugar was a luxury, a naturally fermentable fruit that offered sweetness was a rare treasure. Historians still debate whether the medlar originated from the ancient Caucasus or Central Asia. It was cultivated in ancient Greece, and even Pliny the Elder roams. Most famously, nosy scholar dedicated a section of his Naturalis Historia to the fruit. You may not know Pliny, but if he wrote about you, you were basically TikTok famous in ancient times. The experience of eating a perfectly ripened medlar is hard to describe. It's smooth like applesauce simmered in wine. A slight tartness, like green apples, gives way to a mellow finish of cinnamon or honey. There's a faint touch of tannin, like the first sip of aged red wine. Not loud, not sharp, just slow warming comfort. Like a winter night sitting by the fire listening to logs crackle. And guess what? Medlars store beautifully. After harvesting, you don't eat them right away. You place them on straw in a cool shaded room and let time do the work. It can take 2 to 4 weeks, sometimes longer. But the result is a fruit that waits a rare quality in today's hurry-up world. In an era where people panic over unread emails after 10 minutes, medlar whispers, "The slower it is, the better it gets." Beyond the kitchen, medlar found its place in literature. Chaucer mentioned it as a symbol of aged ripeness laced with meaning. Shakespeare used it too, usually in cheeky wordplay. Imagine Elizabethan flirting, "Thou art as the medlar ripening sweetly with time." Whether it charmed or confused depends on the audience. But because of its visually challenging exterior, medlar was eventually pushed aside by more conventionally attractive fruits, apples, pears, plums. Fruits that looked pretty on a table needed no waiting, no explanation. In the age of appearances, medlar became the outcast, labeled as odd, too ugly for the fruit stand. Do you notice a pattern here? The more unique a plant is, the slower it ripens, the more likely it is to be forgotten. Salsify skirt, and now medlar reach required patience. But in return, they offered an experience no fast food menu ever could. If you're still awake, let your imagination take you back to a winter's night in 1268. In a limestone kitchen, the fire flickers as a cook gently spoons out blended medlar flesh to make a tart. An apprentice sneaks a taste and hits the flavor of honey, kissing the season's first snow. And if you think waiting 3 weeks for a fruit to ripen is strange, wait until you hear about a wild plant that once saved thousands from starvation. But that secret will have to wait for the next part. Wonderful. You're still here. That probably means you've placed your phone gently beside your pillow, letting the whispers of the 13th century drift through your mind like a soft breeze at the window. And guess what we've just talked about, a fruit that ripens through time. Now let's turn to a vegetable that asks nothing of you at all. Chickweedies, the name sounds like a joke. But this joke once saved entire villages. If you wander through a patch of untamed land behind your home on a March morning, chances are you've stepped on chickweed without even noticing. A humble little plant, soft as velvet, with tiny white flowers hugging the ground, it looks like nothing special. And perhaps that's exactly why it's been forgotten. But rewind the clock to medieval times, and chickweed was no mere weed, it was a divine gift in times of famine. Picture yourself as a 14th century farmer. The frost lingers into April. Wheat hasn't sprouted, the turnips haven't emerged. The children cough from malnutrition. Then along the fence line, in an untouched patch of earth, you spot a delicate spread of green. Chickweed. You didn't plant it. But there it is, growing, quietly. Rich in vitamin C more than oranges. Packed with protein, iron, and even used to reduce fever. People once called it Our Lady's herb, whether for religious reasons or simply because when there was nothing else left, it was the one thing you could eat and still survive. Chickweed has a cool, mild taste, never pungent. You can eat it raw, boil it, toss it into soup. Crushed, it could even be applied to the skin to soothe boils and burns. Every part stem leaf flower was useful. Even birds favored it as a delicacy, which is where the name chickweed comes from. In parts of England, housewives would dry chickweed and store it for winter. Some families survived almost entirely on it during years of failed harvests. The strange part? It wasn't until the 20th century that laboratories confirmed what your great-great-grandmother already knew: chickweed is a genuine superfood. So why did it vanish from the dinner table? The answer is rather simple. Chickweed isn't pretty. It doesn't gleam like lettuce. It doesn't crunch like watercress. It doesn't have a marketing campaign like kale. It grows wild, defiant, and let's be honest, no one wants to sell something people can pluck for free in their backyard. Historians still debate whether chickweed was ever formally cultivated or simply too useful to need planting. Some medieval maps reference wastelands for chickweed and nettles, implying it was woven into crop rotation systems. But by the Industrial Revolution, when everything began getting barcoded and shrink-wrapped, chickweed no longer had a place. The modern world tends to overlook what can't be packaged. Chickweed doesn't keep long. It wilts in transit. And if you search chickweed salad online, you might get a few confused glances from 5-star wellness blogs. But here's something worth remembering. Chickweed doesn't need us to survive. No tending, no fertilizer, no irrigation. It grows like kindness, it appears, where there is nothing left. Now picture this, a spring evening in a small monastery in Normandy, year 1352. An old monk, frail and hunched, stirs a pot of soup made from dried beans and a handful of chickweed gathered from the courtyard. He hums a hymn as his hand trembles. He tastes it and smiles, not because it's delicious, but because it's enough to see another day. And you lying there under a warm blanket, think about that. That there exists a vegetable forgotten by the world, still quietly growing, not needing to be named, not needing applause, just growing in case someone needs it. Still awake, good, because I have another character to introduce, Scorzonera. A name that sounds like a spell, but it's actually a root that could help you survive a winter without a fridge. You're still here. That means you're like me. So me, one who loves stories that sprout from the soil, creep through history, and cling to human memory like vines on old stone walls. So now let's gently bend down, press our hands to the cold earth, our ancestors once tilled and discover a name you've almost certainly never heard at dinner. Scorzonera, or if you prefer the more flavorful version, viper's root. Yes, really. I'm not making this up. The name comes from the Italian scorzone, meaning poisonous snake. Sounds like something that would make you drop your fork, right? But don't be too quick to judge, because that very fear is what led our ancestors to believe that scorzonera could cure snake bites. Medieval herbalists often planted scorzonera near monasteries or rural homes, especially those close to the forest where venomous snakes weren't metaphorical threats. When a child was bitten, the root would be crushed, boiled in wine, and applied to the wound. How effective was it really? Hard to say. Historians still debate whether scorzonera was truly antivenom or simply a comforting remedy in desperate times. But the true lasting value of scorzonera lies at the table. Its skin is coal black, shaped like a long quill, but inside it's snow white and smooth. When cooked, it offers a delicate flavor somewhere between asparagus and chestnut, with a whisper of sweetness like licorice root. And the most remarkable part, it doesn't spoil easily. Farmers of old could bury scorzonera in sand for 6 months, and whenever snow blanketed the land, they would simply dig it up for a warm, nourishing winter meal. Picture this. A mother in Alsace, deep in January's frost, walks barefoot into the root cellar, lights a dim candle and pulls a few scorzonera roots from the cold sand. That evening, there may be no meat, no wine, but scorzonera stew with purple onions and a pinch of salt was enough to keep a family alive through hunger. Did you know scorzonera's golden age was in the Benedictine monasteries? Monks forbidden from eating meat on many holy days came to cherish this humble root. One document even records a soft plate of scorzonera simmered in almond milk carries the purity of a morning prayer. But then, just as you might have guessed, scorzonera faded into the shadows. When potatoes arrived from South America, they brought everything scorzonera lacked: easier to grow, easier to store, richer in starch, and simpler to cook. And so, like so many ancient vegetables, scorzonera quietly disappeared from the garden. No one mourned, no one remembered. Just a few lines in herbal texts and a few seeds tucked away in the global seed vault in Norway. The strange part is scorzonera still grows wild. You might spot it along Central European mountain paths or in a forgotten corner of a garden in northern France. It grows uninvited, as if whispering, "I'm still here in case someone needs me." And if you're lying there now, late at night, your phone's glow slipping behind your eyelids, let me whisper one more small truth. A recent Dutch study found that scorzonera can support digestive health thanks to a rare fiber called inulin, the very substance modern food science is now trying to manufacture in labs. You see what today's scientists are racing to synthesize the ancients once unearthed with bare hands. Some things are forgotten not because they were lacking, but because they were too humble. Now you've seen it, chickweed scorzonera. They don't make headlines. They have no brands, no hashtags. But they once saved lives, nourished souls, and kept humanity fed when the world turned cold. Still awake? Because if you are, I'd like to introduce you to another character, a strange root that was once used as a substitute for fish during Lent. Good. You're still there, still lying still, maybe smiling just a little. We've just left scorzonera, the gentle viper's root, and now well glide through the mist of time to meet another humble vegetable that tastes of the sea, yet never came from the ocean. This is salsify, often called the oyster plant of the garden. Sounds bizarre, doesn't it? A root growing in dirt that tastes like oysters. But this is no exaggeration. Salsify, tragopagon, porifolius in Latin, when simmered in milk or roasted with sea salt and thyme, develops a rich, slightly salty aftertaste reminiscent of the sea. Don't believe me? Then ask the medieval monks, those quiet geniuses of scarcity who cultivated salsify in cloistered gardens where meat and fish were forbidden during Lent and necessity gave birth to culinary creativity. Historical records mention that in a monastery in France, Lenten meals composed entirely of vegetables still tasted of seafood, thanks to salsify. An interesting detail. Recent archaeological studies at an abandoned monastery in Belgium uncovered soil layers packed with fossilized salsify roots, proof that this vegetable was no myth. It was a staple dish for centuries, especially in colder regions where fishing wasn't possible year-round. And yet its name salsify has caused more than a little confusion. It's not salty like salt, it doesn't grow near the sea, and it's certainly not part of the oyster family. Yet somehow the name stuck. As if fate had a sense of humor, historians still debate its exact origin. Some believe it came from Salesa comfort during winter, as it was one of the few vegetables that could be harvested beneath the snow. Others argue it stems from ancient Greek referring to goat's beard, because its curly leaves resemble the scruff of an old billy goat. Whatever the case, this root is incredibly resilient. Its taproot can burrow more than half a meter into the earth, and the colder it gets, the sweeter it becomes. Yes, its true salsify only develops its sweetness after the first frost. Sounds like a beautifully sad metaphor for life, doesn't it? Some things only become delicious after they've endured a winter. Medically 15th century records show that salsify was used as a diuretic and digestive aid. One text even claimed it disperses evil winds from the belly, which, let's be honest, is a poetic way of saying it helps with less embarrassing digestion. As for the taste, if you've ever tried a blend of artichoke, white radish, and just a hint of oyster, that is salsify. And if you haven't, well, congratulations. This might be your chance to dream of a new flavor as you drift off to sleep. Once during a 17th century trial for vegetable theft. Yes, people were once prosecuted for stealing roots. The defendant admitted they couldn't resist the temptation of roasted salsify with butter. A delicious little crime, wouldn't you say? Today, salsify is slowly reappearing in a few rural farmers' markets across Europe. Some young farmers have begun cultivating heirloom varieties under a more poetic name, oyster plant. Just think in a world overflowing with fast food and synthetic flavors. A dirt-covered root tender, silent and shaped by winter, can still move people simply because it represents something genuine. And if you ask me, so what made it disappear? The answer isn't surprising time. Time, industrialization, the demand for fast-growing crops, easy storage, easy peeling. Salsify doesn't comply, it must be peeled immediately after harvesting, or it turns black within minutes. It's like a sensitive child in a world of harsh demands, unloved. It fades quickly. But there are still seeds. There are still storytellers. And there are still people like you lying still bathed in soft light, doing nothing except listening to stories that rise from the soil, from memory, from hearths long gone cold. You're still there, aren't you? If so, relax your shoulders. Breathe slowly. And prepare to meet one of the strangest fruits ever tasted in medieval Europe. It can't be eaten fresh, not because it's poisonous, but because it must ferment on the tree. We are about to meet medlar, the fruit that's legally rotten. Now close your eyes and imagine a small forest garden. Late autumn winds rustling through bare branches, and beneath a leafless tree, a few brown wrinkled fruits lie on the ground as if they'd been dead for weeks. But they're not rotting, they are medlars. The medlar fruit, known as mispel in German, was once the favorite dessert of European nobility. It sounds strange, because when ripe the fruit resembles a tiny wrinkled bottom soft mushy and scented like a mix of sourdough and overripe apple. Modern minds might label it spoiled, but to the people of the past, it was nature's jam. A fun fact, medlar cannot be eaten straight from the tree. It's rock hard and so sour it'll twist your face like a plum struck by lightning. But if left undisturbed for a few weeks in a cool place, often nestled in dry straw, or tucked into a wall nook, it will begin to blend. That means it will rot officially. But this isn't decay, it's a natural enzymatic transformation, turning the flesh into something soft like apple butter, sweet like cinnamon, and touched with the scent of spiced cider. If you've ever heard of controlled rotting, this is the perfect example. And medlar was doing it centuries before biology coined the term. Here's something few people know: Shakespeare mentioned medlar in several of his plays. And not kindly. He used it to mock pretense and, yes, the sexual antics of the nobility. In other words, in Shakespeare's eyes, medlar was crude, suggestive, and full of innuendo. Historians still debate the medlar's exact origins in Europe. Some say it came from the Middle East, passed through Turkey and Greece, and spread to Italy and France. Others believe it's native to Europe, particularly the Balkans. Either way, it was once a delicacy for the elite. Only those with storage rooms and the patience to wait could enjoy a fruit ripe enough to seem spoiled. In the Middle Ages, royal chefs even made medlar wine a light oaky beverage with a flavor somewhere between honey and apple jam. The blended fruit was pressed mixed with grape or apple yeast and aged for at least 6 weeks in small wooden casks. The result, a warm, mellow drink often served around Christmas. And here's the humorous part: in Old French, medlar was nicknamed cul de chien, which translates quite bluntly to dog's bottom. The fruit's base had a dimple that, well, you can imagine. Despite its vulgar nickname, it still sat proudly on noble tables as a year-end treat. Today you'll rarely see medlar in supermarkets. Not because it's extinct, but because it doesn't fit the modern aesthetic. It isn't shiny, it's not ready to eat, and it doesn't travel well. Yet dedicated gardeners in France, Germany, and England still grow it as a symbol of patience and late reward. If you're the kind of person who wants everything, now medlar might teach you a gentle lesson. The best things sometimes look the worst before they're ready. A bit philosophical, isn't it? But then again, you're listening to bedtime stories, so a little philosophy can't hurt. Take note of this. In the late 18th century, a rural English housewife wrote in her journal, "We know Christmas is near when the woodshed smells of medlar and cinnamon." You may not smell it now, but if your eyes are closed, imagine that rich, mellow aroma wafting through a stone kitchen firelight, flickering on the walls, and in your hands, a small bowl of mashed medlar, mixed with honey and red wine. Are you falling asleep yet? Good. Because next we'll pass through a garden where a certain vegetable was never planted, yet grew everywhere. It's the sweetest trespasser in the history of agriculture, and its name is chickweed, the vegetable that came uninvited. Just give a soft nod if you want me to continue. And there it is. You nodded, even if only in your mind, as your eyelids slowly sink. Then, let's go on. Chickweed, a name as gentle as a baby, chicks chirp. But in truth, this is one of the hardiest survivors in the vegetable world. You don't need to plant it. You don't need to care for it. You don't even need to notice it. But it will grow. It will grow everywhere across the garden, beneath the fence, beside the chicken coop, and even at your doorstep if you leave a water bucket there long enough. The funny thing is, people used to hate chickweed, calling it a weed, while our ancestors once cherished it as a winter-saving green. Imagine a January day in medieval Europe. No electricity, no supermarkets, no refrigerator. The last of the dried beans nearly gone. The bread as hard as stone. And in that biting cold, you spot a patch of tiny green leaves growing close to the ground, speckled with white blossoms like snow. Chickweed, a modest plant, but packed with more vitamin C than oranges, according to some modern nutritionists. You gather it, rinse it in melt water, and toss it into a pot of stewed beans. It's not pungent, not overpowering, but its taste is crisp and clean, like a cross between pennywort and mint. A humble flavor, gentle enough for peasants to eat daily, yet valued enough for nobles to enjoy when fresh greens were scarce. A strange tale. A 14th century record tells of a group of Benedictine monks in France who intentionally cultivated chickweed in cross-shaped garden beds, believing that the flower's four-pointed star symbolized the Holy Spirit. Yes, from wild weed to sacred herb. Historians still debate whether chickweed was a native European plant or an ancient stowaway from Asia, carried along old trade routes. Some archaeological sources have even found chickweed seeds in Egyptian tombs. Perhaps even Ramses once had chickweed sprouting in his royal garden. Wherever it came from, chickweed has stayed close to humans. An uninvited guest, but one with a generous heart. And when the modern age arrived, guess what we did? We called it a weed and sprayed it with herbicide. And so, a year-round superfood humble nourishing was banished from the table simply because it lacked a pretty label. It's the kind of story that feels like a gentle lesson in how we treat the simple things. Even vegetables, it seems, have feelings, at least in bedtime stories. But hey, don't fall asleep just yet, because next, we'll step quietly into the shadows of ancient gardens where a precious root lies hidden with a name that sounds like a spell straight out of Harry Potter's Scorzonera. It sounds sinister, I know. But really it's just a black salsify. And if you're wondering why it matters, let me share with you another secretus secret buried deep in the soil, where tangled roots were not just food, but medicine, and even a point of pride for monastic chefs. Now let me take you on a walk through the world of medieval vegetable cultivation, a world where sunlight, wine, and the church calendar mattered more than any planting app on your phone. Just imagine no tractors, no chemical fertilizers, no automatic irrigation. And yet, medieval farmers grew gardens full of vegetables, herbs, remedies, and above all, the hope of surviving winter. Farming back then didn't begin with checking the weather. They looked up at the moon, sniffed the wind, touched the soil. And above all, they asked the church, because most agricultural schedules revolved around the liturgical calendar. Certain feast days were designated for root planting, others only for harvesting leaves. To plant on the wrong day was to go against God's will, and sometimes you'd be punished with an unexpected frost or a caterpillar outbreak that seemed oddly strategic. One of the most curious cultivation methods was something known as the hortus conclususa walled garden, often maintained by nuns or monastic healers. In these gardens, each plant was arranged as a symbolic image. Chamomile stood for patience. Rosemary meant remembrance. Tansy symbolized life after death. And of course, edible vegetables nestled shoulder to shoulder with sacred plants, a kind of mix and match between nutrition and devotion. It was a garden where you didn't just feed the body, you nourished the soul. What about farming techniques? There were three things medieval people understood better than most. 1. Crop rotation. They divided the year into planting cycles, always letting one plot of land rest each season to recover its strength. 2. Manure was gold. Without synthetic fertilizers, they used ash animal dung and even diluted urine to nourish the soil. Sounds odd maybe, but the earth loved it. 3. Companion planting. They knew that if you planted onions next to carrots, or skirt carrot flies would go elsewhere. They didn't call it biodiversity, but they lived it deeply and instinctively. A curious detail. In large monasteries, there were often silent garden spaces where only one person was allowed to tend the plants, and that person had to remain completely silent. It was believed that noise would disrupt the energy of young plants. Imagine spreading compost while whispering, "Hang in there, little one," a bit unnerving. Isn't it? Historians still debate whether medieval people truly understood agricultural science. Some argue it was all superstition and tradition, but others have uncovered highly detailed farming texts, like the 13th century De Agricultura, stored in monastic libraries describing precise methods for crop rotation, herbal pest control, and even how to identify when a plant had lost its soul. Sounds strange. But if a plant failed to grow leaves, though the soil was healthy and there were no signs of disease, the problem was believed to be that the plant's soul had left. The remedy: sing to it. Seriously. You see, growing vegetables back then wasn't just labor, it was ritual. Every seed sown was a prayer. Every row of soil smoothed by calloused hands was a gesture of reverence, as if caressing a fragile little spirit. Today we have tractors, sprinklers, chemical fertilizers, and yet some of the most beautiful gardens are still those small ones, planted by hand, watered by heart. And dear listener, if you're still awake, I'd like to tell you about a strange technique for winter preservation, storing vegetables in sand. To survive the long months without sunlight, without vitamin C, without Uber Eats. Are you ready? Rest your head on the pillow and listen closely to the earth's quiet breath. When the harvest was in and the first skin-splitting winter winds began to blow, the farmer knew the crops couldn't stay in the field. But there were no refrigerators to shove the turnips, onions, or skirret into. So they turned to something simple, humble, and miraculous: dry sand. Fine, clean sand taken from riverbanks or open fields was mixed with fireplace ash or slaked lime, then poured into underground pits, large clay jars, or even stone wall recesses beneath the home. They arranged the roots in layers carefully, as if laying eggs in a nest of straw. Each vegetable layer was gently covered with a layer of sand. And then they waited. Why sand? First, dry sand keeps moisture stable, not too wet to rot the vegetables, not too dry to shrivel them. It was like a thin blanket lulling the vegetables into a long winter sleep. Second, sand repels pests. Most bugs, fly larvae, and rot-causing bacteria don't like burrowing through dry sand. Simply put, they're lazy. And you know what? When nature itself slows down for winter, the farmer wins. Another peculiar method: hanging vegetables upside down. It may sound like a yoga class for radishes, but truly people believe that suspending roots from the ceiling helped sap flow back into the body, keeping them fresher longer. Some even sealed the tops of the roots with beeswax, a natural barrier invented centuries before refrigeration. The most common places to store them, not barns, but under the stairs beside the stable, or even near the hearth, quiet corners with stable temperatures and little airflow. Hidden away, like how you tuck your favorite socks into the back of a drawer. Historians have long debated the effectiveness of these ancient techniques. Some claimed they were just folk wisdom with no scientific foundation. But in the early 20th century, when victory gardens sprang up across Europe during the World Wars, people found themselves returning to sand. A study in Austria showed that carrots stored in sand could stay crisp for up to 5 months. Daikon radishes survived the entire winter as if they had never been dug up. Onions may have frowned slightly from the lack of sunlight, but their flavor remained bold and rich. In other words, our ancestors knew exactly what they were doing. A detail few people notice: large medieval monasteries had special root cellars, but not for everyday vegetables. These were for medicinal plants, precious roots like Scorzonera salsify or seeds of lovage good King Henry. And guess what? Each type of vegetable was preserved in a different way. Roots buried in sand or hung upside down. Seeds mixed with fireplace ash stored in cloth pouches. Dried leaves pressed between sheets of leather tucked inside prayer books. Medicinal roots soaked in strong spirits sealed with beeswax. It sounds like something out of a fantasy film, and yes, many people at the time believed that whoever owned vegetables that never spoiled was blessed by God. Because you see, in the dead of winter, a pot of hot soup made with real vegetables felt no less than a miracle. Once again, you see, vegetables weren't just food. They were memory. They were faith. They were souls preserved through time. And in the modern age, when you see a perfectly polished carrot on a glossy supermarket shelf lit by cool LED lights, have you ever thought of the dirt-covered hands, the silent layers of sand, the clay jars resting beneath a hearth 800 years ago? If you hadn't, well, now you are. So now close your eyes. Imagine yourself descending a creaky wooden staircase. Below is a stone cellar. There are no electric lights, only the faint flicker of a single candle. The air carries the scent of dry sand of onions, mingling with fireplace ash. On the wall's iron hooks hold white radishes hanging upside down, as if waiting for a secret feast. Do you see them? They are sleeping. Quiet, safe. And so are you. If you're still awake, then soon. We'll tell you about the vegetable cakes baked from mashed scorzonera, mixed with eggs and goat's milk, and why monks believe that eating them would help you speak less idle words. But that's a story for another dream. For now, all you need to do is listen to your breath and let the memory of vegetables, of soil, of days, without haste, slowly lead you into sleep. If you ever thought veggie cakes were invented by modern vegan calves, you'll be surprised. Because hundreds of years ago, Benedictine monks, Augustinian friars, and even secluded nuns in Cornwall were baking scorzonera cakes. The ingredients very simple and quite unusual. Mashed scorzonera, first simmered in lye water to soften and remove its natural bitterness, was mixed with free-range hen eggs, fresh goat milk. What we now call organic at twice the price, along with marjoram leaves, thyme and crushed cumin seeds. This mixture was poured into earthenware baking molds. Not perfectly round like muffins, but square with gently curved bottoms shaped like a cupped palm. They were placed directly over hot coals or into hand-built stone ovens. No parchment paper, no electric mixers. Everything was done by hand, judged by eye, measured by experience. They called them silent cakes. Why such a strange name? Because these cakes were only eaten on silent days, usually Mondays and Fridays, when monks were bound to 24 hours of total silence. These cakes were soft, easy to digest, low in oil, didn't require sauces, and didn't crunch, perfect for monastic life. Also, maybe because they made you a bit sleepy. Feeling oddly seen right now. Another curious thing, scorzonera cakes were believed to purify speech. Ancient handwritten records, some of which now rest in Oxford libraries, note the belief that scorzonera root could calm the mind, guard the tongue from unkind words, and allow the mouth to speak only what is necessary. In other words, the more you ate, the less you gossiped. Of course, historians still argue about this. Some say it was just superstition tied to fasting days. Others reply, if a food truly makes people sit quietly, without complaints, without slander, maybe it's more worth keeping than Facebook. Nutritionally, scorzonera is a treasure trove. It contains inulin, a natural prebiotic that supports gut health. It's also rich in potassium, magnesium, and soluble fiber. But in the Middle Ages, people didn't use scientific terms. They simply said, eat this cake and your belly feels light. Your head doesn't feel heavy. There are even records that monks after eating scorzonera would go for a walking meditation, slow deliberate steps around the cloister garden where good King Henry grew, and skirret and the dahlia beds not yet in bloom. Can you imagine it? Soft footsteps beneath the stone arches, monk sleeves brushing past violet petals. No words spoken, only a cake in the belly and warmth in the heart. If your eyelids are starting to grow heavy now, that's perfectly fine. That's what's meant to happen. But if you're still awake, here's one more detail. A quiet truth you won't find in any textbook: the monks didn't use spoons or ladles to make these cakes. They used their hands, because they believed the hands carry the energy of prayer. Truly. Every cake before going into the fire was touched by hand, gently. No forceful kneading, just a soft placement, as if whispering, "May this nourish the soul of the one who eats it in silence." And if tonight you remember only one thing from this story, let it be this: some foods, though simple, were once considered blessings. Not because they tasted good, but because they helped people fall quiet. As quiet as the kiln, as the winter garden, as the midnight hour you're living right now. Now breathe out slowly. Let your mind wander among the moss-covered cloister arches. You hear the soft pop of glowing embers, the faint scent of scorzonera crisping at the edges, and the ancient damp wood of the monastery kitchen. Out there is night. Within you is stillness, and the cake is baking. You don't have to say a word. Sleep well. Wonderful, so don't jump out of bed just yet. Just lie there. Close your eyes if you wish, or let your spirit drift with my voice. Because now, we'll continue our stroll through that old garden where ceramic jars hold something the modern world would never expect: vegetable wines, or more precisely fermented drinks made from herbs, roots, and seeds, once kept people alive through the bitterest of winters. People often think wine can only be made from grapes or occasionally from barley. But in medieval Europe, grapes didn't grow everywhere. Especially not in the high cold regions like Scotland, Bavaria, or the wind-swept valleys around northern French monasteries, where the chill whispered reminders of life's impermanence. So monks, farmers, and local healers learned to ferment whatever nature offered. From good King Henry leaves, they distilled a pale, slightly sour liquid that smelled like grass after rain. From skirret roots, mashed and soaked in diluted honey for several days, they created a drink that was lightly sweet and extremely low in alcohol, belly-warming wine meant for children and the sick. And perhaps the strangest of all wine, made from the leaves and seeds of Alexander, a sharp, peppery drink with a flavor somewhere between green peppercorn and fennel. It wasn't made for intoxication, but to chase away foul spirits, warm the belly, and clear the mind. One curious debate among historians is whether vegetable wines were primarily food or medicine. In old Latin manuscripts, many recipes blur the line. One day, a wine is prescribed for bloating. The next, it's poured at a saint's feast. Sometimes a monk would scribble a note in red ink, to be drunk on rainy days, no reason needed. We may smile reading such lines, but perhaps we're also reminded. Ancient people didn't live in neat categories like we do. To them, a sip of scorzonera wine could be both a starter and a prayer. Technically, making vegetable wine was surprisingly simple. No alcohol meters, no temperature-controlled cabinets. Everything relied on passed-down memory, a sensitive nose, and a quiet belief that fermentation near the altar would ferment more kindly. The barrels were typically made of aged oak, hollowed and sealed with tree resin. When fermenting skirret, or scorzonera, people often added fennel seeds, dried apple peels, and a pinch of dried moss, not for taste, but to preserve the memory of summer. In many regions, it was believed that opening the wine under a full moon would bring out the soul of the drink. Open it on the wrong day. You guessed it. The wine would turn against you, sour as the face of the neighbor who wasn't invited to supper. That's one of 3 jokes in this part. The other 2 are coming soon. Today you might find a skirret wine recipe in a few historical cookbooks or heritage brewing guides. But you'll likely struggle to recreate the true flavor because one ingredient can't be found in any supermarket time. Not just fermentation time, but the kind of time that belongs to the world itself, when nights outlast days, when winter makes you savor every drop that smells faintly of roots and memory. Modern life has forgotten this craft. What we call fermenting now happens inside cold steel machines, far from hands and stories. Gone are the blessings from farmers, gone is the wind slipping through stone cracks as yeast quietly stirred to life. So tonight, if you're still awake, imagine you're holding a small ceramic cup inside it. Scorzonera wine, warm, lightly spicy with a dry kiss on the tongue. You lift it to your lips. You don't gulp. You just touch it. Then exhale slowly. The scent of earth, of winter, of forgotten herbs, and root-borne memory drifts through your chest like a quiet lullaby. Now you understand why the ancients called this the drink of the clear-minded. Not a drink to forget, a drink to remember you're alive. And you hear in the 21st century can close your eyes and drink it the same way. Wonderful. So now, imagine this. A pale morning sun just begins to peek over thatched rooftops. The air still carries the chill of dawn. The soil underfoot is soft and damp like a thick blanket not yet washed. And you, though still wrapped in your warm bed, can picture yourself standing in an old vegetable garden preparing for something that medieval people saw not as labor, but as ritual harvest. The old folk had no printed planting calendars, no phone reminders to harvest scorzonera or skirret. They read the soil, listened to the wind, smelled the climate. And when the roots began to gently push the soil upward, like a breath, when the leaves darkened just slightly and leaned toward the eastern light, they knew the vegetables were ready. Each root had its own whisper. Skirret was usually harvested late once the top had nearly dried, but before the ground froze. The farmer would use a pointed wooden spade, digging diagonally, not straight down, because skirret doesn't grow in a single stalk, but in clusters, like fingers. Too much force, and the roots would break. And as the elders used to say, a broken skirret, a bitter supper. That's one more soft joke for you milled, like scorzonera's gentle spice. Scorzonera, on the other hand, is the opposite. Its root grows long, straight, and deep like a black nail, driven into the earth. To harvest it, one needed a curved blade or a special levering stick, digging a deep trench lifting from below. If done wrong, the thin black skin would tear, ruining the flavor, once described as almond mixed with spring mud. That might not sound delicious, but imagine it nestled in a steaming stew served with dark rye toast, and you'll think again. And what about good King Henry? This humble herb is as kind as its name. No digging needed. You simply cut the leaves at the base, leaving the main stalk, then sprinkle a little wood ash on the soil as a sign of thanks. A little known fact. Back then, wood ash was one of the best fertilizers. But not just any ash oak or chestnut ash was ideal, rich in potassium, helping vegetables grow with supple leaves, deep green color, and a flavor that holds even after boiling. Modern researchers would confirm this centuries later. But as you can see, medieval farmers already knew long before the lab coats. A common image in old manuscripts is the harvest basket woven from willow or chestnut bark with a curved handle like a crescent moon. Inside, an uneven mix of roots, long and short, clumped with soil and a few hibernating bugs. No one found this unpleasant. It was simply seen as the marks of life. People believed that vegetables too clean weren't real vegetables. Have you ever seen a skirret root that's too white, too smooth, not a speck of earth clinging to it? If so, that's likely nobleman's food. As for the villager's version, a bit dirty, but it warms the belly more deeply. A memorable historical moment. In the 13th century at St. Gall Monastery, now in Switzerland, a record listed over 60 types of vegetables cultivated and harvested year-round. Among them, skirret was mentioned as one of 5 vegetables permitted during periods of meat fasting. This document reveals something important. Harvesting vegetables was not just an act of survival, but part of a spiritual life. Every time a root was pulled or a leaf was cut, it was seen as reaping blessings from the earth. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some modern historians argue that romanticizing medieval harvests is misleading. They point out that most vegetables were likely harvested young due to a lack of proper storage, and many often spoiled or rotted quickly, if not consumed right away. But still, on a quiet night like this, while you're lying in bed listening to old tales told by an unfamiliar voice, perhaps it's kinder to believe the gentler version, isn't it? So now you know how they harvested. But what about after the harvest? Would you like me to tell you how they stored root vegetables through the winter without a refrigerator? If you're still awake, a soft nod is enough. It'll continue gently, like the sound of soil cracking as a winter root is pulled from the earth. And so after the morning's harvest with baskets full, sleeves rolled up and boots muddy, the medieval farmer didn't rush to cook. Not because of laziness, but because there was still one crucial step: preservation. Picture yourself now standing in a cold stone cellar, its walls covered in moss, the scent of damp earth mixed with dry roots and mildew. No fridge, no plastic wrap. Only time, tradition, and a few handed-down secrets the modern world has largely forgotten. Preserving roots bury to live, not to die. For roots like scorzonera, skirret, or salsify, they were never washed immediately. Washing would ruin them. Washing would wake them too soon. Instead, the roots were left covered in soil, lightly air-dried in the shade for a few hours, then reburied, but this time, not in the field, but in dry sand or clean sawdust, deep inside the storage cellar. Yes, you heard that right. They buried the roots again in sand. Why? Because sand holds gentle moisture and steady temperature. But more importantly, it prevents early sprouting. If you've ever left potatoes in your kitchen and found them sprouting like alien tentacles, you know why this matters. The process was simple: a layer of sand, a layer of roots, another layer of sand, like baking a multi-layer cake but with earth instead of flour. These root cellars were often located beneath the kitchen or beside the animal stalls, where the natural warmth of the fire or the breath of cows helped maintain a stable microclimate. Leaves and tender greens not dried, but put to sleep. What about tender leaves like good King Henry or corn salad? Their soft texture meant they required a different approach. Sometimes they were briefly blanched, then pressed and wrapped in coarse cloth to dry in the air. Or more curiously, they were packed in warm wood asha. Little-known method even today. Remember how ash was used as fertilizer? It also served as a natural preservative. People would sprinkle ash over freshly picked greens, wrap them in oiled paper or large leaves, and store them in a cool, dry place. Ash repelled fungi, kept insects at bay, and slowed decomposition. Some elderly women even believed the ash preserved the soul of the vegetable, helping it sleep peacefully without rotting. Superstitious maybe, but if vegetables could last through 2 months of winter this way, perhaps the superstition deserves some respect. The root cellar. The heart of winter, many households dug deep underground cellars lined with straw bark or old hides and called them vegetable vaults. The temperature inside hovered just above freezing, perfect for preserving roots. One little-known detail: many root cellars were built at a slant, bowl-shaped, so moisture would drain away instead of pooling. A simple technique, but effective. The mild humidity tricked the vegetables into thinking they were still underground. See, the ancients may have lacked modern technology, but they had wisdom and the patience of monks. A few scholarly debates to keep you company tonight. There's still some academic debate about medieval vegetable preservation. One group of agricultural historians believes methods like ash and sand storage were mostly used in temperate zones like southern England or northern France. But others argue that archaeological evidence from Poland, Austria, and even Russia suggests the method was far more widespread, though materials varied. Where sand wasn't available, people used crushed pine needles or rice hulls. There may not be a final answer. But as far as bedtime stories go, these debates give you one more tale to fall asleep to. So now you know harvest doesn't end at the pulling of roots. Those humble vegetables must still be guarded by hands, cradled by earth, and preserved through quiet belief. A little soil, a little ash, a handful of sand, an entire winter is nourished. So, shall we continue? Would you like to hear about the winter meals made from these ancient vegetables, where sweetness came not from sugar, but from soil and from waiting? Ah, you're still awake? Or maybe you're just floating in that space between slow breaths and the imagined scent of hearth ash. Either way, let's keep going, because the vegetables have been stored, winter has arrived, and now they become a meal. The stone kitchen clay pots and the sweetness of slowness. Can you picture it? A typical medieval kitchen. No electric ovens, no pressure cookers. Just a smoldering hearth clay pots and a wooden spoon worn thin at the handle. And yet it was here that winter's quiet magic unfolded. When Skirt was pulled from the sand, its thin skin still dusted with earth, they would peel it gently, no need to scrub it spotless. Because to them earth was not dirt, it was fragrance. The roots were briefly blanched, then added to stews with dried beans, a small piece of salted meats, and sometimes just pork skin for flavor. A few sprigs of autumn herbs, like dried thyme or tarragon, would be crushed and scattered into the pot like a quiet blessing for the meal. When salsify was stewed with onions and a bit of sheep's milk, the broth thickened silky and rich, releasing a scent like morning porridge with a whisper of distant sea air. Not a meal for royalty, but enough to make you forget the frost behind the wooden door. Stories by the stew and vegetables for dessert. As the pot simmered slowly, people didn't just cook, they told stories. Have you noticed, winter is the season of low fires and long tales? One strange anecdote was found in the diary of a monk in Normandy. He wrote that once the monastery kitchen cooked for 12 hours straight just to prepare the white pottage for a feast day. It contained only salsify, yam, and chestnut milk. But by morning the stew had grown so thick that a spoon stuck in it would stand upright. Sounds like a joke, doesn't it? But according to some culinary historians, this dish may have been the medieval equivalent of thick milk porridge served with a drizzle of honey as a winter dessert. Yes, you heard that right, vegetable dessert, straight from the Middle Ages. And the sugarless tart that everyone craved during special occasions like Advent or the Feast of the Epiphany people would prepare ancient vegetable tarts, a dish that was savory, yet just a little sweet. Usually made from mashed skirret, goat cheese, free-range eggs, and a spoonful of wild forest honey. The crust was crafted from barley flour and lard, not crispy, not fluffy, but aromatic, and able to hold the taste of vegetables like a scented letter sealed and sent to memory. Of course, no one makes this kind of tart anymore, unless you're a Culinary Academy chef or perhaps someone with insomnia, listening to me ramble at 2 a.m. Just kidding. Sort of. Because nighttime taste buds are different, aren't they? At this hour, your body doesn't crave bold flavors. It wants something warm, slow-told. In the middle of scholarly debate, a quiet truth. Amid all these culinary details, one academic debate continues to simmer. Did medieval people truly enjoy vegetables as we do today? Or did they simply eat them to survive? Some historians argue they ate vegetables because there was nothing else. But others, including folklorists and cultural researchers, insist that telling stories by the stew, passing recipes by word of mouth, and baking vegetable tarts on feast days are all signs of an emotional cuisine, not just subsistence. What do you think? That's a question you might carry into sleep, assuming you haven't already dozed off during that skirret tart recipe. And now, do you hear the crackling hearth fire in your mind? A bubbling pot, tender skirret, warm breath, and the imagined scent of sweet herbs. Sleep, too, is a kind of harvest-gathering dreams sown in old stories, so that when morning comes, perhaps you'll remember the name of a long-forgotten vegetable. If you're still with me, take a deep breath and let me lead you to the next tale, a story about a root once believed to be a source of immortality, but abandoned because its name sounded like a disease. Are you ready? If you're still there lying, still barely moving except for half-closed or dreamy eyes, then let's continue. Scorzonera, the misunderstood snake root. What comes to mind when you hear scorzonera, a vegetable, or a troubling symptom? Your doctor warns you not to Google. Can't blame you. Even in the Middle Ages, the name made people hesitate. Derived from the Italian scorzone, meaning venomous snake. The name arose from the belief that this long black root could cure snake bites. Is that true? Modern botanists shake their heads. But in a world where medicine was barely beginning, you used whatever you could. Scorzonera is a cousin of salsify. Remember the oyster root, but scorzonera is gentler, milder, less ocean, and more earth. Its flavor falls somewhere between asparagus and chestnut, a combination that sounds like a joke until you realize it's strangely addictive. And something few people know, this root doesn't just feed you. It lasts astonishingly long. If stored properly, it can remain edible in a dry wooden cellar for 6 months. No fridge, no vacuum seal. Just clean sand, cold air, and darkness. One root, two lives scorzonera once appeared in monastic medical journals with a list of near magical functions. Aids digestion. Cools the blood. You don't need to understand what hot blood meant, just know it was a medieval doctor's obsession. And believe it or not, it was sometimes cooked with wine to expel evil spirits from the body. Sounds mystical? Maybe. But several Eastern European sources confirm that scorzonera contains antioxidants and natural insulin, making it ideal for midnight snackers who can't sleep. Like you, perhaps. Historians still debate scorzonera's true origin in Europe. Some claim it came from Spain, brought through Arab trade routes. Others believe it was a wild root from the Caucasus, brought back by monks who tried growing it and got addicted. But one fact needs no debate. Scorzonera was a staple vegetable in monasteries during Lent, that 40-day period of no meat, no fish, only plants, and faith. Harvesting is no joke. Unlike skirret, which you could dig up by hand, scorzonera demands a blade technique and patience. Its roots are long, straight, and if they break, the flavor is lost. Monks typically harvested it once the soil turned cold and firm, not wet and mushy, because soggy ground clings to the thin outer skin and causes it to rot faster. Each root was wrapped in dry leaves and stored in a cool cellar. When needed, it was brought up soaked briefly and scraped gently with an iron blade, a process once described as cupping therapy for vegetables. There's even a quiet culinary joke among food historians. If you can peel scorzonera without cutting your hand or losing your temper, you might be fit to be pope. One meal, many feelings, scorzonera was often cooked simply boiled until soft with a pinch of salt and butter, if you were noble, or mixed with mashed beans and a little fried onion if you were a villager. But during feast days, baked scorzonera with eggs, coriander, and aged cheese was considered the main course for Christmas Eve dinners across parts of northern France and southern Germany. A full, satisfying meal without a single piece of meat. Sounds plain, right? But you know what? The feeling of sitting beside a stone hearth, watching flames flicker on golden roasted roots, the aroma rising in a winter night. Tastes better than any 7-course tasting menu. Not because of your palate, but because in that moment your heart opens ready to receive even the smallest blessing. And now, if you're still here, eyes gently shut, breath steady like quiet waves, let's continue. This time not through a garden or field, but to the marketplace of the Middle Ages. How much for a bundle of greens? Medieval vegetable prices sounds irrelevant, right? But hold on. Let's imagine you wake up in a thatched wooden house. The sky is foggy. Your stomach rumbles after last night's thin porridge. You throw on your coarse linen cloak, grab a wicker basket, and walk down the muddy path to the village market. You stop at a modest produce stall. No receipt, no QR code, just a firm voice, a bundle of scorzonera, 3 deniers. No haggling. 3 deniers, roughly half a day's wages for a barrel maker or the cost of 1 old beer at the village inn. In other words, vegetables were not cheap. Especially the so-called medicinal greens like scorzonera, good King Henry, or salsify, because they weren't just food. They were believed to cure bellyaches, detox the body, and repel spirits, according to rumors. A little-known fact, vegetable money was medicine money. Back then, markets weren't divided into neat produce sections, like in modern supermarkets. Folk healers and vegetable sellers often sat side by side, because many edible plants were also medicinal herbs. One record even noted that the price of a bundle of greens could depend on the seller's mood. If they had just come back from confession, the price would be gentle. If they just argued with their husband, you'd best turn around. In certain regions like northern Italy or Burgundy, rare vegetables could even be bartered for labor like cutting grass or hauling water for the monastery kitchen. In other words, no money. No problem, just bring your hands and some kindness. Historical record, in 1348, vegetable prices skyrocketed because of the Black Death. That year, the Black Death swept through Europe. A third of the population vanished. Markets emptied, farmers died, and vegetables went unplanted. The result, prices tripled. Scorzonera and other perennial vegetables suddenly became edible gold. Survivors rationed their cooking. Some mothers even stuffed dried greens into pillows to pray for their children's health. At one point, a single bundle of vegetables could be traded for a small knife. Historians still argue about whether monastic vegetable markets truly existed. Some manuscripts suggest monasteries held special markets only during major feast days where prices came with blessings instead of bargains. Others disagree, saying monasteries accepted offerings, not commerce. But whether those markets existed or not, one thing is certain. To villagers, monastery vegetables tasted better, felt cooler, and digested easier. A kind of PR without TikTok, yet still wildly effective. 3 light jokes to keep you from dozing off too soon. 1. People back then didn't ask, "What's your job?" they asked, "Do you grow scorzonera?" 2. A medieval pickup line. "I have greens that last through winter, want to share them with me." 3. And the classic grumpy vendor phrase, "No money for vegetables. Go eat grass, kid." Now let's quietly close the night market. You might still feel the cold earth on your fingers, the scent of dry onions from a distant kitchen, and the soft toll of the church bell like a lullaby in the dark. Prices may change. Markets may shift. But the feeling of holding a fresh bundle of vegetables grown by hand under real sun, not UV lights, is enough to warm your heart even through hunger. So if your eyes are starting to sting, don't resist sleep. Let it come. In the next part, we'll return to the garden, to the humble vegetables that grow on their own, without invitation, and always seem to know when you need a simple, silent meal. And as long as you're still here, or even just half awake, well, wander back to that quiet little garden where the plants that need no tending still rise gently, as if Mother Earth herself was silently sending you a gift. Wild greens, a silent gift from nature. No packaged seeds, no chemical fertilizers, no planting dates scribbled in garden journals. And yet, on a quiet spring morning, when you open your back door, the tender leaves of chickweed, fat hen, or corn salad are already quietly blanketing the ground like a gentle greeting. They grow everywhere, along roadsides, beneath stone walls, between cracks in the rocks. And you don't have to do anything except pay attention. What does it feel like to pick a handful of young chickweed, as soft as brushing a bird's wing, as cool as morning dew? Its taste crisp, fresh, slightly tart like lettuce, returning from a spa retreat. How the ancients harvested, no scissors, no gloves. You bend down bare hands, pluck greens with your fingertips or a small knife with a worn handle. Baskets were made of wicker, or sometimes just corn leaves folded into a pouch. Ancient farmers never picked everything. They left the roots so the plant could grow back. And they harvested by the moon's cycle, believing that moonlight made the greens sweeter, juicier. Superstition, maybe. But on a bright moonlit night, with no electric lights, walking silently among the herbs with the distant call of an owl, who could resist picking wild greens under that sky? Verified historical fact. A ban on picking greens in monastery gardens. In 1412, a monastery in southern Germany issued a strange rule. Villagers were forbidden from harvesting wild greens within monastery grounds, even chickweed and purslane. Why? Not because the monks were stingy with vegetables, but because they feared it disrupted the peace of their meditative environment. One monk wrote, "Each morning we wake to find the garden patches stripped clean and hear the scuff of sandals during morning chants." So the heavy wooden gates were locked, and wild greens, once a free gift from nature, became a regulated resource. A curious fact: chickweed knows when you need it, not in a Disney magic kind of way, but still remarkably interesting. Chickweed has a natural behavior called nyctinacity, meaning it folds its leaves at night or when disturbed. Some farmers in the Middle Ages believed chickweed hides itself unless the gatherer is truly hungry. Of course, modern science says it's just a moisture-conserving reflex to protect from pests. But when you're tired hungry and you see a patch of chickweed opening under the first shaft of morning light, you'll understand why the old folks called it the green with a heart. Historians still argue about whether wild greens were considered property in the Middle Ages. Some legal records from England and France state clearly the land belongs to the Lord, but what grows naturally is God's. However, once villagers began harvesting, too much local clergy changed their tune, declaring that the plants growing on holy ground now required a tax or a tithe to the church. As you can see, policies across all eras have a certain suspicious flexibility. 3 light jokes before you drift off to sleep. Chickweed, the only vegetable that knows when you're pretending to be hungry. The Middle Ages, where foraging greens could violate God's intellectual property. If wild greens had Instagram bios, it would be no farming needed, still viral. And so, we close the wild garden where greens grow without invitation. You don't need to be a farmer monk or druid to understand the worth of a small handful of greens growing between cold stones. They are simple, resilient, and reliable, like an old friend who shows up even when you've forgotten their name. And sometimes the things no one tends to are the very things that carry us through our hardest days. If you're ready for the next part, stay. Because beyond the greens, there is a hearth, a sweet soup, and steam rising like a bedtime blessing. March 1349. In a tiny village in northern Italy during the peak of the plague, a young mother suspected of illness was forced to leave the village. But that night, an old monk came quietly to her hut, carrying a basket of salsified chickweed and wild garlic. No one knows what words they exchanged, only that 3 days later the woman was allowed to return. Not because she was healed, but because the villagers believed those vegetables were blessed. They whispered, "No one dies after eating the old priest's greens." And just like that, the value of those plants soared with no logic necessary. Curious fact, greens were once used as currency in night markets. In parts of Wales and southern France, vegetables weren't sold during the day. People believed that if you traded greens under sunlight, the soul of the soil would bleed out. Dramatic, yes, but very on brand for the era. And so the night vegetable market was born. Buyers carried oil lamps, moving from garden to garden, bargaining with a smile, a few chunks of charcoal, or even a song. Modern historians still debate this. Some cite folk records to say it really happened. Others dismiss it as a bedtime legend passed down for fun. But either way, it reveals something beautiful. Vegetables didn't just feed the body. They connected hearts to one another. How were vegetables priced? A bundle of lovage could equal 3 chicken eggs. A handful of early-season corn salad might be traded for a bowl of fermented honey. A basket of fat henna plant nobody cultivated, yet everyone ate, could cover a half-day's wage for soil work. Sometimes vegetables were used to trap affection. You might gift someone a sprig of tansy, not for eating, but for the scent to linger. Tansy has a strong, distinctive aroma, and people believe the recipient would be unable to forget the giver. Put in modern terms, that was Tinder for the vegetable era. 3 soft jokes before you delay sleep just a little longer. If veggies had bank accounts, back then they'd be richer than kings. Vegetable prices fluctuate wildly, especially when the neighbor's hens stop laying. If someone gives you tansy, be alert. They either like you or they're trying to repel mosquitoes. You see, every old bundle of greens didn't just nourish, they told stories. Stories of seasons of kindness, of neighborhood bonds, and of things too quiet to name. So next time you walk through a modern market holding a bunch of kale, try to imagine what if you'd had to harvest it in the frost, trade it for a church service, or offer it as an apology. Wouldn't it mean more when things come too easily? They're easily forgotten. But maybe, just maybe, tonight in your dreams, you'll see a small basket of greens on a stone windowsill. Not meant to be eaten, but to be remembered. Clairvaux Abbey, 1397. The nuns documented healing an outbreak of mouth ulcers and poor digestion using soup made from lovage skirret and good King Henry. No antibiotics, no synthetic drugs, just vegetables, water, and patience, and the patients recovered. Today, modern science confirms lovage contains anti-inflammatory essential oils. Skirret is rich in easy-to-digest fiber. Good King Henry has iron and vitamin K. And just like that, the vegetables won. A little-known fact: did you know that ancient vegetables like salsify or fat hen often contain more minerals than modern cultivated greens? The reason is simple. They grow slowly. When a plant takes its time to grow, it absorbs from Mother Earth more fully. Minerals from crumbled stone microbes, from composted life, and a depth of nourishment that chemical fertilizers can never replicate. Take fat hen, for instance. It has more calcium than kale, more protein than cabbage, and less oxalate than modern spinach. Meaning your body actually absorbs nutrients better without them being stolen by blocking compounds. Historians still argue about whether medieval people truly understood the nutritional value of vegetables. Some argue no, they ate what kept them alive. But others, drawing from monastic records, believe they were surprisingly intuitive. They knew which greens helped postpartum women recover. They harvested at specific moon phases to soften the bitterness. They used vegetables as medicine, not in terms of fiber or vitamin A, but through lived experience and instinct. One 12th century monk once wrote, "He who eats chickweed while it rains will not feel a headache by dawn." Today, science reveals chickweed reduces fever and mild inflammation. Turns out our ancestors didn't need Google, they had earth and time. The flavors that healed skirret, rich in soluble fiber, keeps you full without bloating. Imagine a nutty sweet mash that leaves you feeling lighter than when you started. Salsify, the garden oyster, contains inulin, a prebiotic that feeds good gut bacteria. You don't just feel fully, you feel cleansed, as if someone tidied your digestive system with care. Good King Henry, with its iron and vitamin C combo, fends off anemia, especially in winter, when blood seems to curl up into the corners of your chest. Lovage, a natural anti-inflammatory, promotes urination and kidney cleansing. Simply put, you pee it out and feel lighter in soul. And 3 final jokes to carry into your dreams. If old vegetables could talk, they'd complain I was a celebrity. Now you compost me. Vitamin K won't help you forget your ex, but at least it reminds you to drink water. Who needs collagen when you have fat hen soup? Your skin may not glow, but your laughter will. You see, vegetables in the old days weren't side dishes. They were the meal, the medicine, and the lesson from the soil. Every leaf wasn't just nutrients, it carried the unspoken blessing of the grower. May today nourish you better than yesterday. Are you still awake? I still have more to share. Next time, we'll explore the oldest reconstructed meal in culinary archaeology, where researchers found charred vegetable residue on ancient stones. But tonight, just remember this one thing. A vegetable is never just a vegetable, especially when picked by hand, cooked by flame, and eaten with gratitude. Sleep well, dear listener. You'll be right here whenever you need another voice in the night.